Good morning, everybody. We will get started in a couple of minutes, so please feel free to take us to stretch, to grab a cup of water or coffee, and rejoin us in about 2 minutes.
Anika, I have a question. Our actions to what time we have to say it, or you're going to present it?
We will introduce you.
Okay. Thank you.
I can see people joining the event right now. Thank you for being here. We will get started in about 1 or 2 minutes. So as I've shared, please feel free to grab water or coffee or stretch and rejoin us in a minute or so. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are joining us from around the world. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Voices from the Grassroots Radical Solidarity, an event coordinated by OCIC's Gender Equality Hub in commemoration of the Commission on the Status of Women's 66th session and in parallel to this event. We are very excited and have a fulsome event today for everybody, and we're so happy that you have taken this time to share this space with us today. Before we get started, and for those of you who may not be familiar with the Canadian context of land acknowledgement, I would like to first acknowledge the Indigenous communities' land that we are joining from today. OCIC, the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, operates on the traditional and unceded territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also acknowledge that our membership, staff, and board operate across what is known as Turtle Island on the unceded territory of numerous Indigenous people. I myself am joining from the unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe on Two-Row Wampum Belt and Dish with One Spoon territory, known along settler lines as St. Catharines, Niagara Region, Ontario. I don't want a land acknowledgement to just be a naming of the Indigenous communities on whose land we live, work, and play. I actually want a land acknowledgement to underscore the importance of framing our involvement and engagement in the international cooperation sector and beyond through the lens of reconciliation. We have a responsibility, if you yourself are a settler like me, to stand in solidarity with Indigenous communities who have and continue to fight for social justice on their own lands. As we think about moving land acknowledgements beyond words to action, I invite you to think of today's land acknowledgement as a framework through which your engagement in today's event can be approached. How can you use the acknowledgement of the Indigenous communities on whose land you live, work, and play on, as a way to ensure that the lessons you may take from today's session can be used outside of the space that we hold together to more effectively serve as an ally and in solidarity with Indigenous people. I welcome you, wherever you're joining from, to share in the chat what Indigenous land you may be joining from, and how you hope to take away lessons from today's session to stand in solidarity with those communities. So welcome everybody to Voices from the Grassroots Radical Solidarity. I want to just give a couple of housekeeping rules. Just please note at the bottom of your screen, you will see a small globe that will allow you to access interpretation. This will allow you to hear the event in Spanish, French, or English. Please click on that globe and the language you would like to hear in order to hear it in a different language. You will also see that we have ASL, American Sign Language interpreters, on screen. So please feel free to spotlight or highlight the videos of the speakers and interpreters in the way that best supports you. I also want to flag that we have enabled the question and answer chat at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions at any point during today's session, please feel free to share it in the question and answer box, and we will do our best to get to it during our moderated question and answer session. Just a quick overview of today's agenda. We've done our land acknowledgement and welcome remarks. I will introduce you shortly to Kagwiria Muturia, our moderator. We will hear from our incredible speakers from around the world, Aisha Hassan, Shobha Shrestha, Suyapa Uklis, Yesenia Villalta, and Ru Wadal. And then we will move into a question and answer where you will have the opportunity to also pose questions to our speakers. We will also then hear from one of the members of the Voices from the Grassroots Working Group and a member of OCIC's Gender Equality Hub about the context of the Voices from the Grassroots initiative and how we got to where we are. And finally, we'll do some reflections and closing, and I will share a short poll at the end of today's event. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Kagwiria Muturia from World Renew, one of our incredible Gender Equality Hub and Voices from the Grassroots member. Kagwiria Muturia is a gender justice and women's rights expert with extensive experience working with development and human rights organizations across many regions globally. Initially trained as a human rights lawyer, Kagwiria has a deep passion for gender equality, the empowerment of women, and diversity issues. Her favorite thing to do when not working is running after her 2 sons, trying out multicultural recipes, and driving to different cities in Canada. Kagwiria, I'm going to hand the floor to you. Kagwiria, I'm not able to hear you. I'm noticing you may have some audio issues. This is the context of working in a virtual world. So thank you everybody for your patience.
let's try and be a little bit analog. Maybe you might be able to hear me without my mic.
I can hear you
I'm sorry, Ron. Can the interpreters hear me? Great. Okay. I am sorry about that. Yeah, so thank you very much, and greetings to you wherever you're joining us from. We as members of the Gender Hub at Ontario Council for International Development have the privilege and honor of hosting you this morning or evening or afternoon, wherever you're joining us from, as we conclude the Commission on the Status of Women. The Commission on the Status of Women is an annual event that happens every year in New York to bring together women, women's rights and gender justice advocates from all over the world to continue the discourse on the different ways that we can continue to have greater solidarity to address women's issues and gender inequalities and related issues such as climate change, which is the topic of the day today. Climate change is not a singular issue. It's not just an environmental issue. It's a social justice issue that affects the most vulnerable within our communities. And that's the theme of CSW this year. What are some of the ways that we can come together to continue the discourse of addressing inequalities within the climate change discourse? So I will not take a lot of time. I will welcome our wonderful panelists who have joined us today from all over the world. And I will introduce to us our first panelist, Ayesha Hassan, who's joining us from Pakistan. She's the Associate Regional Director at the Community World Service Asia, with a lot of diverse experience on campaigning and project management, gender equality, and human rights. They all have very, very rich bios, and in the interest of time, knowing we only have 1 hour, I will not read our full bios, and I'll welcome Ayesha to take the floor now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Feria, and thanks very much to Voices from the Grassroots for inviting me to this platform. So Community World Service Asia, this is the organization in which I work. And it is an NGO which works in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. And then we have our program in other parts of Asia as well. In Afghanistan, we work in the southern side of Afghanistan in provinces called Laghman and Nangarhar. And then we also run programs in the central part of Afghanistan, which is called Bamiyan. And this is the place which is very famous for Buddha statues also, if some of you may know, which were destroyed by Taliban during Russian war. So CWSA works in different thematic areas, for example, with the help of our partners, we work to improve quality of education being offered to girls in Afghanistan. We do work on increasing enrollment of girl students. Then we also have health programs, livelihood programs, both for men and women. Climate change, of course, is our main area of work. So Pakistan and Afghanistan, both countries are amongst the most affected by climate change, and it is said that the extent of climate change will intensify in coming years. As per World Food Program report, 22.8 million people in Afghanistan are experiencing acute food insecurity. And just to share with you, the total population of Afghanistan is 41.7 million. So one can imagine that like out of 1.7 million, we are talking about 22.8 million people in Afghanistan who are experiencing like acute food insecurity. And food insecurity, like it is one of the key indicators when we are talking about effects of climate change. In Pakistan also, like food insecurity, the food security rate, insecurity rate in some areas, it is as high as like 38%. And then like if we look at the key indicators of malnutrition, which are like stunning, wasting, and then underweight under 5 years of age. So like the stunned children, for example, their rate is in both countries, it's like about 41%. So in our work, we believe that like women and girls are at the heart of climate action. And just to give you an idea that like the area about which I am talking about with reference to gender inequality. So like no matter if the food is less available or more, men in the family are the first ones to be served. And then comes the children and lastly women. And if food like gets finished, women at times, they just drink like 2 glasses of water and go to sleep. CWSA is working at various levels to combat effects of climate change. Like for example, at community level, we work with communities to build their capacity. Like for example, if there is some area which is prone to disasters or flood, let's say, so then we do share with them, we teach them how they can do, like for example, mapping exercise, that in case flood comes in, what could be like some of the safe places where they can take refuge. Then like other community interventions include like encourage them to do kitchen gardening, introducing drought resistant seeds, etc. Then at times, like I'm now talking about that area which is affected by drought most of the times of the year. And at times like communities, they have water scarcity is the key issue in area where we are working. And at times like communities, they dig wells and they spend like all their savings in digging those wells. And many a times the water which comes from those wells, it turns out to be brackish. At times like the water table is very low and will get dry very soon. So it means like all the savings, all the resources, little resources which they have, they go waste. So we did introduce like scientific method that how with the use of satellite images, they can identify spots where there is availability of water, so that like once that spot is identified through using satellite images, they dig well there and the water table is good. And like they can use it for drinking and for other purposes. Then we also feel that like while doing climate change interventions, advocacy work is also very important. Like for example, taking disaster management authorities, local authorities, other stakeholders on board, so that they can also have ownership and they can then replicate these interventions in other areas. Because like being an NGO, we can do work only at a limited scale. But we do like keep government authorities on board so that they can scale up like these interventions. And in all of this, like we make sure that like women are kept in the leading roles, whatever community structures, like for example, we are making in order to implement our programs, we make sure that like women are in leading roles. And to share with you, like it is not easy because like women's mobility in the areas in which we work, it's very less, and we have to, our mobilizers, salute to them, like they have to work really hard in order to convince communities to allow their women to come to our trainings, to participate in our programs, etc. I would also like to share with you one of our very like interesting intervention which we use in Community World Service Asia. So if you see this truck, we call it like a mobile knowledge resource center. And this is a truck which is equipped with simulation models. So like, for example, if there is flood coming in, so basically we use it to educate communities that how disasters, if comes, how it can affect them and how they can prevent themselves from these disasters, how they can reduce the losses which happen because of disaster. So like, for example, there is a simulation model in the truck, which shows that, like, for example, if earthquake comes, how it damages their houses and what kind of houses like should they build in order to prevent themselves from the loss. So this is like a very useful tool to educate communities, to educate children, and it is, as you can see, it is mobile. So we take it in different villages to educate communities. Then we also feel that like there should be some programming done for economic empowerment of women in order to build their resilience. So we established a social enterprise, which we call Tanka. In the area in which we work, like there are good embroidery skills of women, but like they do it very traditionally using colors, such colors and designs which are now not much in demand if we talk about urban areas where the market is. So like we do engage designers, and then we build their these women's capacity that how they can modernize their products so that they can sell it in market easily and can get regular income. So like this is some of the work which we are doing in order to reduce effect of climate change, and thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ayesha, for that powerful presentation. You know, just bringing to the fore the fact that the earth continues to cry for our attention. Thinking about the over 50%, the over 22 million, which is over 50% of the population in Pakistan experiencing acute food insecurity. That is, and that's not an isolated situation of one country. It's, as we're going to hear from the other panelists, it's a situation and as a situation that's been shared across the globe. So we'll continue to hear from the other panelists as we continue the conversation of how can we come together, especially as women's rights organizations or gender just organizations, to reduce the impact of climate change, but also bring women to the center of the discussions that are happening at all levels. Thank you also, Alicia, for bringing to the table the fact that we need advocacy and we need to have these conversations at higher levels. So I'll go on to our second panelist, Shobha Pradhan, who's the founder and executive director of Women for Peace and Democracy in Nepal. She is a peace building professional with over 20 years experience working with communities in Nepal and internationally on conflict resolution, women's empowerment, and human rights. Shobha, the floor is yours.
Namaste. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me well? Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
I can hear you at least,
okay.
Shoba.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kakrita Muchira, for the wonderful introduction. Namaste, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks to OCIC for having me here. I'm so honored to be in the panel with the lovely people and to be connected with wonderful audience around the world. Before I begin, I would like to take the opportunity to thank our donors because without that support, I wouldn't be here today. The World Accord, Government of Canada, Hope International, Human Concern International. I'm going to talk more about my work working with the women marginalized in the rural communities of Nepal. It's been more than 2 decades I've been involved in sector, and I'm very happy to share the learnings I've got working in the grassroots communities. It helped me to unlearn and learn a lot of things. There have been many challenges of discriminations, injustice, while we're there having a lot of challenges. As many other countries, Nepalese society is also deeply patriarchal. The women and girls are largely excluded from the education, health, economic opportunities, and social services. We have a very low literacy rate, about 57%, and our gender inequality index ranks Nepal in the 108th country out of the 155 countries. Unfortunately, girl child is seen as a burden, and they are married off at a very early age, and they are more with the traditional work. And due to the climate crisis, women have to walk far to collect what, like daily item water, like water, firewood, and fodder for animals and farming. And due to the climate change, they have to suffer more stress, and ultimately it's been there's increasing health hazards and illness. So this is how the women are facing in the rural parts of Nepal. And to address the inequalities, to address discrimination, injustice, we have been working with 1,500 women groups for socio-economic transformation in the rural parts of Nepal. Our organization, Women for Peace and Democracy Nepal, is very feels fortunate to work with these women. Definitely, there are lots of challenges while working in the communities. The first challenge we have realized is there are very good policies, good laws for gender equality, but the weak implementation is the main hindrance for us to work in the communities. And because of the very low literacy rate, women feel that it's their destiny, it's their karma, that they need to keep quiet for all the discrimination and injustice that's been given to them, and they are afraid to talk about the injustice, being afraid of the possible consequences, they have to cope with, because it's such a unfortunate thing is even they raise issues at the district court and they file the case. Ultimately, due to the culture of impunity, these abusers are free, they get free. And ultimately the women have to live with that men because they are dependent on the men. She cannot earn her living, and ultimately she has to go and live with her husbands. So that's the culture of impunity, is a very, very difficult aspect while working in the communities. And definitely a patriarchal mindset where they feel that, okay, women needs to stay at home. She needs to cook, serve, work, everything, and still get dominated. And she is not allowed to go and participate in trainings or workshops and programs. And if she goes out of the house, okay, she's not a good behavior, or she's a cheater. So such kind of accusation is also being given to these women. So that's another challenge for us to work in the communities. And definitely during the lockdown COVID-19 pandemic, lockdown, these victims were they were quarantined in the same place, same room with the abusers, and resulting to spike of domestic violence and a lot of suicide cases. However, all these challenges are there, but with a commitment, dedication, like you're passionate, working for the women and marginalized, the staff team, and the women in the field, we have been able to do something for the women to bring some positive changes in the transformation, economic and social transformation. The first thing I would like to say is economic independence. Out of 1,500 women, almost 50% almost everyone is involved in IGAs, income generating activities, to become independent. Because unless you are independent, you cannot raise voice against gender injustice or discrimination, nothing. So each and every women are involved in small scale enterprises, but out of 1,500, at least 50% women have now business registered in their names. Now they can say, this is my work, my business. And also, there are a lot of husbands working as migrant workers abroad. And these husbands, at least 50% husbands are sending their money, remittance money in the name of their wives. So now the women have started to have a control in their lives. She can decide where to spend, when to spend, and also she can send her girls to school. Earlier, only sons were sent to school and girls were married off in early age because she is seen as a burden, right? After we work with the women groups. So I'm very happy to say that the sense of strong sisterhood among the members of group is emerging. And that's a great asset for Women for Peace and Democracy. These women who have a strong sense of sisterhood, they share ideas, progress, learning, joy, sufferings with one another every month they meet. They meet once in a month. And if any women face any kind of gender-based violence or discrimination, anything, the women shows the solidarity and sisterhood by visiting the victim's family. They try to solve the problems there and then, but if it does not, then they report to the district office and then get justice for the women. There are lot of cases happening this. And moreover, I would like to stress is, I don't know in other countries, but here when you say divorce is a stigma here in Nepal. But now these women who are living in rural parts of the country saying to their mothers are saying to their daughters, it's okay to come back home divorced than rather to coming in a coffin. Because there are lots of suicide cases. Because when the mothers used to say, no, don't divorce, try to negotiate or compromise. Now, no, we don't want our daughters to do suicide. So these are the things our women are progressing. And another main thing they are doing is that they're exercising the human rights. They're raising questions on development budget allocated for women and girls. They're asking the local government to be transparent during the public hearings. They're asking questions about the right. The rights to education, rights to water, as you said, because there's scarcity of water. There are landslides, and then because of the soil, sometimes too much rain and sometimes no rain. There are lots of landslides going on, and they are homeless, and they are raising the questions to the local government. Where are we going to live? And they're raising voice. These women who were once not able to even say their names, they are now asking the local government about their rights, rights to freedom, rights to speak. So The women and girls have savings in their own bank accounts. They have small scale enterprises, they get remittance money, and they're sending girls to schools, and they participate in different kinds of workshops and discussions.
Thank you, Shoba. I'll ask you to summarize in the interest of time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Shoba, for that very powerful presentation, linking economic empowerment and how we can reduce the vulnerability of women in the communities, how they're more economically independent, how they now have more agency in the countries, but also having the solidarity and sisterhood. But even as we have solidarity and sisterhood and are more economically empowered, their powers beyond ourselves, the powers that come with the disasters of climate change, the floods, the famine that's affecting many people and leading to forced migration. How do we link these things? How do we have people who are resilient, but then are able to overpower powers beyond themselves? You've also brought a very important point of intersectionality. It's not just about women, it's about the younger women, it's about other vulnerable groups in the community. So we'll go ahead to our third speaker for the day, and that's Yesenia Bilata, who works for the Association for Community Development, Environmental Protection, and Multiple Services in El Salvador. She's been part of this organization for the last about 18 years, and starting out as a volunteer and now working as a project coordinator within the organization. Yesenia, the floor is yours. I will ask Yesenia, before you take the floor, I'll ask our panelists to try and stick within their time. And I'll also ask if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please feel free to put them to the chat.
Hola a todos.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Sí.
Yes? Good. Thank you very much for having invited me to this forum. This is the Voices from the Grassroots work. My job consists of finding rural participants and communities, finding people who are represented in the communities. It's important because being a woman and working in the communities and working in marginalized communities, rural communities, is hard. Why? Because agriculture people are usually very old-fashioned with their ideas. What we usually do is segregate men and women. And therefore, we can work in different projects. Around 10 years ago, I worked with a community of farmers. They saw this as strange. They thought that I was only going to come there, read something, show them the documentation, and I was not going to have an opinion on their jobs. But when they started seeing that I would not only come and read something, but that I was trying to change something, their working methodologies, the use of agrochemicals, that is essential for their work, they started feeling a little bit unease. How could I explain this? They were reluctant, They were reluctant to having women included in their work. However, when I started showing them that we could use organic methods, how they could prepare their compost, how they could start working the land with organic methods, they started seeing that what I was saying was good. They started applying those methods and they could see the differences. They saw that it was going to work better. Therefore, they were more welcoming to me. Today, I'm part of their group. They consider me one of theirs. Now, so if we think that they have this mindset that women should stay home and raise children, it's difficult. So I'm trying to change their mindset. I'm trying to make them see the difference. Gender situation in rural communities in El Salvador is difficult. Even though the country has developed significantly, rural women are still a big question in El Salvador. The national policies invisibilize rural women. Most of them are educators, farmers, they're organizers of the communities, and they are the pillars for the education of their children. However, there is still right vulnerability in the area, and it's probable that this reality is even harder. This is not really shown in the statistics. Only a little bit of a very low percentage of them are considered. Some of them should work in land leased or third-party lands. Only a few of them have access to their properties. The ones who have access to properties is their husbands or their children. And it is them who decide whether the land is going to be farmed or leased. A big percentage of female population lives out of $150 approximately. Unfortunately, the urban minimum salary here in El Salvador is like that. Only 1 out of 5 children, female children, girls, go to school. And women have to work a lot. Sometimes they work 16 hours a day in rural communities. And men only contribute with 13% of the house chores. Women also face challenges related to unequal access to resources, gender discrimination, and hindering their potentials. They're excluded from anything that they can do.
I'll ask you to conclude.
Yesenia, please, could you please conclude? Okay. This is the work that we are doing with our sister organization. There are different types of projects, and one of them is focused on helping women recover economically. We also try to help with the environmental issues as well. Our work is quite widespread, and in 5 minutes, I cannot explain everything. But that is part of what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yesenia, and I'm sorry for cutting you short. It's unfortunate we're living in these Zoom times where time is limited, and some of us are joining from different time zones, and we have to respect that. We look forward to when these things go back to in person in New York, and we can have a whole morning of talking about the different ways grassroots are coming together to engage on climate change, gender justice, and disaster risk reduction. You brought out a very important point on how indigenous knowledge is very important. While we know that scientists have told us we can actually address climate change, we can reverse a little bit of it. However, we are lacking political goodwill. And not only political goodwill, we are also not appreciating and bringing to the table the indigenous knowledge that communities and grassroots have used since the beginning of time. So thank you very much for that point. I am going to invite our next speaker, Suyapa. Suyapa Edith Salinas is joining us from Honduras. She will be speaking in Spanish. So if you need to change your channel to Spanish, please do so. And I'll also, in the interest of time, not go into a big introduction. Welcome, Suyapa.
Muy buenos días, muy buenas
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you very much for this opportunity of being able to be part of this forum, to take a few minutes to tell you more or less an overview of what is happening with women and children here in Honduras. I'd like to start by telling you that Honduras in the last perhaps 10 years has been within the first 2 countries with the biggest impacts of climate change around the world. That puts us in a situation that is quite difficult. Now, if we talk about gender, we also see a patriarchal and sexist community with different expressions throughout the country. Feminist organizations consider it the most chauvinist country in Latin America. This hinders the rights of women and children from developing their independence and rights. This prevents women from having spaces in decision-making, independence, psychological, early pregnancy, teenage pregnancy, gender violence, etc., which are the main manifestations of this patriarchal culture. As an organization, we are an NGO that has been for over 40 years in the country. We promote programs facilitating human development, prioritizing vulnerable groups, mainly indigenous women, African descent women, girls, and teenage women. Those sectors are quite excluded in the country. They're very rural. We develop this with high level of poverty, and it is over 70% poverty in the country. And then in the rest of the country, the level of poverty is around 60%. Therefore, their poverty level is higher. We work in an area that is called the Corredor Seco, the dry corridor. And it is known for being considered one of the Central American areas that are most affected by climate change.
This population depends, as a result of the high levels of poverty that they're facing, it depends on the resources that they can gather in that area. Women, since they're seen as mainly having a reproductive role, they are the ones who are considered to be the responsible ones to be responsible for the resources, gathering water, firewood, yet they're not given the autonomy for this. They are put or given this role to collect food, but yet they are faced with food insecurity. They are forced to carry firewood and water large distances. And as we see an increase in deforestation and lack of access to water, this forces women and children to travel longer and longer distances in order to meet their needs. As water access is depleted, this requires them to travel further and further distances. They must dedicate more of their time, dedicate more of their energy to gather these resources. And this limits the amount of time they have for other activities for themselves or to even dedicate it to their own families and their community. We see that women are overburdened. They are almost working double shifts in a day. We must also see that we see this on an increasing basis, that women are trying to take on leadership roles in their community, but are many times left out of important decision making. They are not consulted when it comes to public policy development. The impacts of these issues forces many rural women to move more into urban areas, forces them into forced migration. Now, what are the challenges that we find here? As we see some advancement in the role of women, we don't see significant access or proper distribution of responsibilities within the family. This is a huge challenge that we face as organizations. We must leverage the leadership of women as community leaders. We need to connect them with each other to diminish food insecurity and to improve access to water. Now, some of the recommendations that we would like to make here: it is important to generate more information, more statistics on specific issues to rural areas. We do not have much access to this information. This information doesn't exist, such as the relationship between natural resources and access to microcredit, and what the impact of all this is when faced with climate change. The impact of public policy when it comes to these issues is extremely important. We should not ever stop tirelessly fighting to empower women and make our land more sustainable. Now, specifically in the family environment and the political environment, we need to push for more access to these women in these areas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Suyapa, for that powerful presentation and bringing the linkage between climate change and forced migration. The UN tells us over 68 million people have been forced into immigration, some living as asylum seekers, others being internally displaced, others being refugees in different countries. And many of these have migrated because of reasons of climate change, floods, and other natural disasters. So, and also knowing the precarious circumstances within which women and girls face along this journey of sometimes gender-based violence and abuse, sexual exploitation and related. So all these things linked together to show how really climate change continues to impact the most vulnerable amongst us. We'll have the last speaker for this morning. Allow me to introduce Ru. Ru is my colleague at World Renew. So pleasure to have you here today, Ru, to hear your perspectives from Southern Africa, where you've lived, but also your region where you direct in Asia. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Kagweria. And yeah, thank you, everybody, for attending today. I think the speakers before me have done a great job in setting out the landscape in relation to climate change and the impact on gender. And so I'm going to talk a little bit less about the issues faced by women and girls, and yeah, the disproportionate impact that they face in relation to climate change, and also in relation to sort of the intersectionality of other issues, particularly around COVID. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we do as World Renew to try and mitigate the circumstances that are women and girls find themselves in. And in World Renew in Asia, we work in Bangladesh, India, Laos, and Cambodia in terms of community development, but we also have a number of disaster response programs that we implement in places like the Philippines, Indonesia, recently in Nepal. So we have both we've quite a strong insight into the context all around development, but then also the context in relation to disaster response. So I think, to begin with, what we look to do at kind of a semi-macro level, so that would be sort of district, provincial level, we really look to create an enabling environment. So by that, what I mean by that is sort of trying to develop gender equitable community structures. We do this quite effectively in Bangladesh through what we call people's institutions. And these are collaborative fora that sort of cross a district or a sub-district, upazila is what it's called in Bangladesh. And they're really for the sort of collaborative management of the development context. And through them, we really hope to build climate resilient landscapes and also livelihoods that are supported and linked with your district, your government actors, your other stakeholders. So this really looks sort of, or includes advancing women's leadership, ensuring they have substantive involvement in these institutions, in these networks. Making sure that they are the ones, for example, setting the agenda around protection and decision-making, helping to strengthen those local governance bodies, and particularly in the area of gender equality, addressing gender-based violence, improving livelihoods through the strengthening of self-help groups, cooperatives, and other organizations, particularly around agriculture and subsistence, aquaculture, fishers, working with schools. So really looking at that sort of broader stakeholder landscape. And then at household level, particularly in places like Bangladesh, where we work in probably one of the most climate fragile and climate vulnerable contexts in the world. And down in the south of the country, in the Sundarbans, alongside the Bay of Bengal, where we have some incredibly vulnerable and at-risk communities. And we really look to sort of build disaster resilient households. And by doing that, we're looking to try and obviously stop migration. We don't want to see people having to migrate because they've lost their homes, lost their livelihoods. So it's how do we manage to help people remain where they are? And that's really looking to advance women and girls' priorities in community disaster response plans and mechanisms, training on developing gender mainstreamed emergency response plans. We know that disaster disproportionately affects women and girls, and they are the most at risk and most vulnerable. Women will tend to look to care for their animals, care for their children first before themselves, and this puts them at risk. In terms of food security, we look to build, strengthen sustainable and resilient social ecological production systems. And this is really looking at how we are able to do that with a strong gender mainstreamed lens. And then finally, we look at the biosphere. We really look to protect the ecosystem to ensure that it's there for the future generations, but also how do we harness that indigenous knowledge that has been so important over the years, and in some ways has been superseded or lost. How do we protect that and really help to preserve our biodiversity, reduce flooding, salinity, soil erosion, but do it in a way that supports women, particularly around power dynamics and access to resources and decision making. So as World Renew, that's sort of the intersectional approach we try and take. And obviously, particularly with things like COVID-19, that's made the landscape even harder and placed women and girls into far more vulnerable situations. I know we're pushed for time, so I'm gonna leave it there. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for this opportunity for us to come and share a little bit about what we do and how we try and protect and empower women and girls that are most affected by climate change and intersectionality of other social protection issues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ru. And thank you to all our panelists for the wonderful presentations. As we have very limited time left, I think we'll conclude this part of the session. We'll have a small 5-minute session after this, but it's great to hear that we need, for us to really address the issue of climate change and disaster risk reduction, we need to build the agency of women and girls and other vulnerable groups within the communities. We have to appreciate the space of intersectionality in this wider discourse. Women and girls, other vulnerable groups such as youth, persons with disability, LGBTI communities also, we have to ensure that these voices come to the table. We need to have the inclusion of women at the decision-making table. We can't just have them on the peripheral. And also, as Ru has mentioned in his conclusion, that we need a multi-pronged approach. This is not something only the women's movement can work on. We need government, we need to build especially the strength of grassroots, so then they can come in strong with indigenous and sustainable ways of addressing climate change. And yeah, as we conclude, just the appreciation that the cry, as we've said, the earth is crying for our attention, and the cry of the earth is really the cry of the poor, and it's the cry of women and other vulnerable groups. And we have to keep that. When the companies with bigger carbon footprints impact the earth, they don't feel it the same way. They don't feel the impact the same way the grassroots feel. Someone who has a mud house, when a flood comes, it's going to be the first one to go, not the executive director of a big corporation that has the big carbon footprint. So we'll conclude this part of our session there. We will then invite my friend and fellow member of the communities, the OCIC Gender Hub, to talk a little bit about these voices from the grassroots. It's a project we began at the beginning of COVID in 2019, really wanting to elevate the voices of the grassroots communities. And 2 years later, we're still here and strong. So we're thankful. Najia, the floor is yours.
Good, thank you very much. Good morning, good noon, good afternoon, evening to our panelists and audience from all corners of the world. I just gave an overview of the grassroots project to everyone. The voice from the grassroots project was initiated by organizational and individual member of the Gender Equality Hub of the Ontario Council for International Cooperation in April 2020. The objective of the Voice from Grassroots project was to document the impact of COVID-19 on the lives of women and girls in Afghanistan, Guatemala, Honduras, Kenya, Mali, Philippines, South Sudan, and Uganda. The project's overarching goal is to amplify the voice of women and girls from these countries through stories of their lived experience and their messages to the world leaders. The group tapped into the power of storytelling and captured the voice of women and girls through a digital flipbook and a series of virtual events, especially held in commemoration of International Human Rights Day, December 2020. International Development Week in Canada, February 2021, and the International Day of Rural Women, October 2021. Last year, the Voice from Grassroots project was also featured in the session of NGO Commission on the Status of Women 65th Virtual Forum that ran parallel to the official session of the 65th United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Today, we are honored to be in the same space together with our distinguished speakers in the same spirit of amplifying the voice from the grassroots. I had the privilege of being part of the Voice from the Grassroots project and to reflect on the lessons we learned over the past 2 years of active involvement in the project. These reflections are encapsulated in a reflection report that I co-wrote with Maria Carmona. She's also here in the panel. Today, we are happy to announce that the launch of the French, Spanish, and Dari translation of this report to make our recommendation and call to action heard by wider audience. We invite you to take a closer look at the report. Anika will share the link to the document in the chat box. The Spanish and French version is ready, but the Dari version will be available soon. Allow me to share some of the key messages of that report that I hope you will take away, ponder, and take action on as you leave this meeting today. I will start first. There is a need to build a strategic alliance on harmonizing work among organizations and coalitions doing similar work of amplifying voice from the grassroots. Our challenging time calls for radical solidarity. Women should be given the opportunity to engage with women from around the world who are also experiencing similar situations and provide a venue for collaboration and learning from each other. Increase financial and technical support for community-led and women-led efforts, including in rural and indigenous and remote settings. Make the voice of women count and give them the platform to influence policies and programs on issues such as gender equality, climate action, and disaster risk mitigation. And thank you for your interest and participation today.
Thank you very much, Najia, for that summary. The Voices of the Grassroots indeed has been alive and well for the last 2 years, since 2020. And it's very powerful to see that we're really taking the initiative to make sure that these lessons are being had in the languages that people understand. And that is what inclusivity and transformation is about. It's not saying retaining knowledge in one language. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to Anika to summarize and conclude our session today.
Thank you so much, Kagwiria, and to all speakers, panelists, those who are involved behind the scenes, and interpreters. I'm going to launch a quick poll that you should see on your screen now. Please feel free to fill it out as I deliver the closing remarks. Once again, thank you so much to everyone for being here. It is such an honor and privilege to hold this space and to be able to hear from all of these incredible speakers in their own words, from their own context, and to even have a space to hear from so many diverse communities all at the same time. Thank you too to those who have stuck around for the extra few minutes. As we know, we always have so much to say and so much to learn, and we appreciate you taking the extra time. I'd like to deliver a specific thank you to Aisha, Suyapa, Shoba, Rue, and Yesenia for speaking and sharing your stories with us today. A huge thank you to our incredible interpretation team, Anna, Jenny, Eugenia, Francis, Violin, Enrique, and I think I have gotten all of the names. Apologies if I've missed you, for lending your time and your energy today. And a huge thank you to Roni as well. All of these interpreters from MCIS for their continued support. Also to NCIS for their support with the translations of the report. I have dropped in the chat the link to the Hub page if you would like to find more information and to see the publications, which will be shared on the website shortly, as well as if you're really interested in hearing more about the recommendations condensed, we will also be releasing a recommendations document highlighting all of these incredible recommendations provided by the speakers towards the end of this month. But with that, once again, a huge thank you to everyone for being here, to our speakers for sharing their time, and to all of you for holding this space. It's always such a privilege and honor. Take care. Thank you everybody for being here, and we hope to see you again soon.